There was once an old rabbi in Safed who used to say, "If you want to understand a person's heart, look at the words written on their door." His students would laugh, thinking he spoke of decorations or blessings written for guests. But the rabbi meant something deeper. He referred to the ancient custom of placing sacred words at the threshold of one's home, words that do not only welcome those who enter, but also invite the presence of blessing itself. Among the Jewish sages, there was a saying passed from generation to generation: "Place this psalm on your door, and you will attract infinite blessings." It was not superstition. It was a teaching of spiritual alignment, how the vibration of holy words shapes the atmosphere of a home, the peace within its walls, and the destiny of those who dwell there. The psalm they spoke of was not always the same. For some it was Psalm 121, the Song of Ascents, where the heart lifts its eyes toward the mountains and trusts that help comes from the Lord. For others, it was Psalm 91, the Shield of Faith, where every line is a fortress for the soul. Yet beyond the words themselves lies the essence of the teaching. When sacred text meets intention, the ordinary space becomes a sanctuary. The story that follows is not merely about parchment and doors, but about transformation. How a forgotten psalm returned light to a man's life. How a threshold became a passage between fear and faith. Through it, we will understand why the sages insisted. Blessings do not chase those who run, they dwell where holiness is invited to stay. This journey begins with a question that echoes through every generation. What truly brings blessing into a home? It was a quiet street in Jerusalem's Old Quarter, where the walls carried the scent of stone and centuries. In a small house near the marketplace lived a merchant named Elior. His days were long, filled with the noise of coins, the rhythm of bargaining, and the silent weight of loneliness. He had once been known for his laughter and generosity, but lately neighbors whispered that something had changed. His home felt dim, as though the very air had grown heavy. One evening, a friend visited him after closing the shop. When Elior opened the door, the man hesitated before stepping inside. "Elior," he said softly, "your door looks empty." "Empty?" Elior replied. "It's just a door." The friend nodded. "Perhaps that is the problem." He touched the upper frame and murmured, "Once, these thresholds carried words that guarded the soul. Yours carries nothing." Elior frowned. "You mean a mezuzah? I had one. It fell and I never replaced it. I suppose I forgot." The friend's eyes grew sad. The sages teach that a home without blessing becomes like a body without breath. Replace it, my friend. Write upon your door not only a verse, but a reminder of who you are before heaven. After the visitor left, Elior sat in silence. His house creaked around him. He looked at the bare doorframe, and for the first time, he felt its emptiness like an accusation. That night, he dreamt of his late father, a humble scholar. In the dream, the old man stood by the door, holding a parchment inscribed with Hebrew letters shining like light. "This psalm," his father said, "belongs on your door. You have traded your faith for your trade, and that is why blessing no longer knocks." Elior woke before dawn, trembling. He lit a small lamp and searched through his old prayer books until he found a torn page, Psalm 91. The words seemed to rise from the paper, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." He whispered the lines, unsure whether he was praying or remembering. Something stirred in him, something he had buried beneath years of fatigue and doubt. He took a small piece of parchment from his shop and began to write. His hands shook as he copied the verses, but with each word, his breathing steadied. By sunrise, he nailed the parchment above his door. It was simple, almost fragile. But as the morning light touched it, the air in the room seemed to soften. The silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. That day when customers entered his shop, they noticed a difference. "Elior," one woman said, "your eyes look lighter." He smiled faintly, unsure how to answer. Deep inside, he knew the psalm on his door had not changed his luck. It had changed him. Still, the lesson had only begun. The true blessing, as the sages say, is not in the parchment, but in the heart that welcomes it. Days turned into weeks, and the small parchment above Elior's door became part of the rhythm of his life. Each morning, before stepping into the marketplace, He would touch it lightly with his fingertips, whispering the opening verse of Psalm 91. There was no ceremony, no dramatic change in fortune, but a quiet steadiness began to replace the unease that had shadowed him for years. One afternoon, a traveller entered Elior's shop. He was an older man, dressed in worn garments, carrying a staff and a satchel filled with books. "Peace to you," he greeted, his voice calm, eyes bright. "And to you, peace," Elior replied, arranging spices on the shelf. The man looked around, inhaling deeply. "This place has a scent of prayer," he said. "Rare for a merchant's shop." Elior chuckled. "You must have a keen nose. I sell cinnamon and cardamom, not prayers." The traveller smiled. "Ah, but there is something different here. Tell me, what do you keep above your door?" Elior hesitated, then pointed. "A psalm, my father's favourite. I placed it there a few weeks ago." The traveller nodded slowly. "Psalm 91, the guardian psalm. You may think it guards the door, but truly it guards the one who remembers." Elior tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "The door frame," said the traveller, "is not the protection. It is the reminder. When you touch it, heaven remembers you. And when you touch it with sincerity, you remember heaven. That is where the circle of blessing begins." He reached for the parchment gently, as though blessing it with his presence. The sages taught, a home with words of holiness becomes like a small temple. But if the heart behind it is cold, even gold letters lose their light. Those words lingered in Elior's mind long after the traveller left. That evening, he sat by the door, the psalm gleaming softly in the candlelight. For the first time he read it aloud, line by line, with understanding. "You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day." He paused. How many nights had he feared failure, loss, or loneliness? How many days had he lived under the arrows of worry? Yet here were ancient words reminding him that protection was not in hiding from danger, but in trusting the one who shelters. That night, a gentle peace filled his home. It was not the peace of success or wealth, but something deeper, a quiet assurance that whatever came, he was not alone. Over time, small blessings began to appear. A debt he had forgotten was repaid, a lost friendship rekindled, a customer, moved by kindness, returned with others. The marketplace had not changed, but Elior had. His heart, once restless, now moved with gratitude. When asked about his sudden good fortune, he would smile and say, "It's not the psalm that brings blessing. It's remembering who gave it." Still, there was one truth Elior had yet to learn. The greatest blessing does not come from what enters the door, but from what leaves it. One cold evening, as the last light of Jerusalem faded into the hills, Elior heard a timid knock at his door. He opened it to find a young boy, barefoot, shivering, holding a bundle of herbs. "Please, sir," the boy whispered, "my mother is ill. I tried to sell these, but no one would buy." Elior's first impulse was to send him away. He had already given alms that week, and business had been modest. Yet his eyes drifted upward, to the parchment above the door, to the psalm that spoke of the shelter of the Almighty. He remembered the traveller's words. Blessing is not only what enters, it is what leaves. He sighed, stepped aside, and said gently, "Come in, child." The boy hesitated, then crossed the threshold. Elior gave him a bowl of soup, bread still warm from the oven. As the boy ate, Elior wrapped the herbs in cloth and said, "These are worth more than you think. I'll buy them all." The boy's eyes widened. "Truly?" "Yes, and you may keep the money for your mother." Tears filled the child's eyes as he ran into the night, clutching the coins. Elior closed the door slowly, turning toward the psalm above. For the first time, he noticed that the parchment seemed brighter, as if reflecting the candlelight in ways it hadn't before. That night he dreamed again of his father. "Do you see now?" the old man said. "The words are not magic, they are mirrors. They reflect what you do." When Elior awoke, he understood. The psalm was not meant to summon blessings like treasures from the sky. It was meant to awaken the heart to become a vessel of blessing. In the weeks that followed, His home became a place of quiet giving. Travelers found rest there. Children came for sweets on Sabbaths. Even the poor man at the market began to smile when Elior approached. And every time he gave, every time he opened the door with kindness, he felt the echo of that psalm reverberate through his walls. One morning, his friend, the same who had once called his door empty, returned. Seeing the psalm above the door and the joy within the house, he said, "Elior, you have changed, your home breathes." Elior smiled. "It's not I who changed. It's what I finally allowed to flow through." The friend nodded knowingly. The sages were right. The hand that gives sanctifies the home. The doorway becomes a gate of heaven when the heart behind it remembers compassion. Elior looked once more at the verse, "For he will command his angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways." He whispered, "In all my ways, even in giving." As the day went on, more people entered his shop, some to buy, some just to speak. The psalm had become not merely a protection, but a conversation, a bridge between souls. And perhaps that is what the sages meant all along. When holiness dwells at the door, heaven itself learns the name of your home. If you're enjoying this reflection, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. Late one night, as the city settled into silence and the candles in most homes had burned low, Elior was awakened by another knock at the door. It was not timid, like the boys. It was steady, deliberate. He rose, still wrapped in his blanket, and walked through the faint glow of the oil lamp. When he opened the door, a figure stood there, a man cloaked in darkness, his beard silver, his eyes sharp yet calm. "Forgive the hour," the stranger said. "I was told that in this house, the door does not close to those in need." Elior hesitated. "It does not, though it is a late hour to test that saying." The man smiled faintly. "A door that opens at midnight," he said, "is worth more than 1,000 open at dawn." Elior stepped aside and let him in. The stranger sat by the small table, his hands resting on a bundle wrapped in cloth. The air felt different now, thick, almost electric, as if this guest had brought something unseen into the room. "Tell me," Elior said after a moment, "what brings you to my home?" The man unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a fragment of parchment, old and worn, its edges crumbling. Upon it were words written in faded ink, verses of a psalm Elior did not recognize. "This," the man said, "was found in the ruins of an old synagogue near Hebron. It bears a blessing once spoken by the sages of that place. I have carried it for years, seeking a door worthy of holding it." Elior blinked. "A door worthy?" "Yes," the man replied softly. "Not of gold or wealth, but of kindness. A door that has opened for the hungry, the lonely, the stranger. When I asked in the marketplace, your name was mentioned." Elior felt his chest tighten. "I am not worthy of such a thing," he said. "Perhaps," said the man, "but the psalm is not placed upon a door to honor the home. It is placed to remind heaven of the hearts within it." He handed the parchment to Elior. The old paper trembled in his hands. The script, though ancient, seemed alive. The stranger continued, "The sages taught that this psalm carries the name of blessing not because of the words alone, but because it was written in tears and faith. Place it beside your own, and the two will speak together." Elior fetched a small frame and set the ancient piece beside his own Psalm 91. As he fastened it above the door, a soft breeze passed through the house, though every window was closed. The flame of the lamp flickered and steadied again. The man rose. "Now," he said, "this door bears the prayer of the past and the faith of the present. Keep them both alive." Elior turned to thank him, but the stranger was already near the threshold. "Wait," he said, "at least tell me your name." The man smiled. "Names are for those who stay. I am only passing through." And with that he stepped into the night, disappearing into the mist that rolled through the narrow street. For a long time, Elior stood by the door, staring at the two parchments, his own and the ancient one, now resting side by side. He whispered the words of the psalm again, feeling their weight deepen. The night, he dreamt not of his father, but of a radiant doorway shining with light, and voices chanting blessings that seemed to rise from the walls themselves. When he awoke, the air in his home was warm and still, as if peace itself had decided to stay. He understood then what the sages meant. Every generation receives the same words, but it is the heart that decides whether they remain ink or become light. The following days unfolded like gentle ripples upon a calm sea. Elior's home had become more than a shelter. It was a meeting place of silence and light. Each morning, the first thing he saw was the 2 parchments above his door, the psalm he had written with trembling hands and the ancient fragment left by the midnight visitor. Sometimes, as the dawn spread its gold across the walls, the ink seemed to shimmer, as though whispering secrets too sacred for sound. Elior began to notice that the words of the psalm had taken root not only in his home, but in his thoughts. He would hear its rhythm as he weighed spices, as he greeted strangers, as he walked through the narrow lanes of the market. He shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you shall trust. It became a song that followed him, steadying his heart when fear or anger tried to rise. One afternoon, as he returned from the market, he found an old woman sitting near his door. Her clothes were torn, and her hands trembled from cold. She looked up at him and said, "I've walked all day, but every door has turned me away." Elior felt that familiar stirring, the psalm's echo within his chest. Without a word, he helped her up, brought her inside, and offered water and bread. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she ate. "Blessed be this home," she murmured. "There is warmth here unlike any other." When she had finished, Elior asked gently, "Where are you going?" "To find my son," she said. "We quarreled long ago. I heard he may live near the southern gate." Elior hesitated, then smiled softly. "I will help you find him. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we'll search together." That night, as the old woman slept near the fire, Elior sat by the door again, reading both psalms aloud. With every line, he realized something profound. The psalm was not a shield to hide behind, but a melody that called him outward, toward compassion. It was as if the words themselves refused to remain on parchment. They wanted to be lived. At dawn, he walked with the woman through the streets, asking shopkeepers and guards about her son. After hours of searching, they reached a carpenter's stall near the city wall. There stood a man whose face froze when he saw the woman approaching. Tears came before words. They embraced in silence. The carpenter turned to Elior and said, "How can I thank you?" Elior smiled. "Do not thank me. Thank the words that guard my door. They have taught me to open it." When he returned home that evening, he found that the faint breeze that often stirred the parchment was gone. The air was still, warm, peaceful. He looked up and whispered, "You have done your work again." That night, as the lamps burned low, he thought about how many people pass through life seeking blessings in far places, when sometimes the greatest one waits quietly at their door, if only they choose to open it. He knelt and prayed, "Master of the universe, may my door remain open to all who need rest, and may your words not only guard my house but guide my heart." As he rose, he felt a deep certainty within him. Blessing, he realized, was not something one could keep. It was something one could continue. And in that moment, the house itself seemed to exhale, as though the very walls had learned to breathe prayer. The sun had just risen over Jerusalem when Elior stepped outside to sweep his doorstep. The street, still quiet from the night, seemed softer now, bathed in the pale glow of dawn. The psalm above the door shimmered faintly in the morning light. He had come to expect it. It was as though the parchment itself awakened with the day. But that morning was different. The air was unusually still. Not a sound from the market, not even the usual cry of the roosters. The whole quarter seemed to be holding its breath. Elior looked up, uneasy, and saw a faint haze drifting from the west. Smoke. The rumor spread quickly. A fire had broken out near the olive press, and the wind threatened to carry it toward the homes. People began to run through the streets, shouting warnings, fetching water, gathering their children. Elior felt fear rise in his chest. His home, his shop, all that he had rebuilt through faith and effort, could be gone by nightfall. He looked once more at the parchment above the door. The words of Psalm 91 met his gaze. "You shall not be afraid of the destruction that lays waste at noonday." He whispered it aloud, but his voice trembled. Do I truly believe this, he thought, or have I only recited it? Just then, the same friend who had once reminded him to restore his mezuzah came running. Elior! The fire is spreading fast! We must leave! Elior looked back toward his home. Go, he said. I will come. But he didn't move. He felt drawn back inside, as if something called to him. He entered, closed the door, and stood before the Psalms. If ever I have trusted you, he said quietly, let it be now. He took a deep breath, then began to chant, not as a plea, but as a declaration. The ancient words filled the room, steady and strong. He shall give his angels charge over you, to guard you in all your ways. As he prayed, a strange calm settled over him. The smell of smoke grew fainter. He stepped outside again, and what he saw would be told for years afterward. The fire had reached the corner of his street, but then the wind turned. The flames curved, bending away from his home and the few others nearby, dying slowly in the open square. By noon, the danger had passed. Neighbors gathered, some in tears, others in awe. Elior, said one man, your house should have burned first. It was closest to the press. How is it untouched? Elior looked at the door, where the parchments fluttered gently in the returning breeze. It was not my home that was spared, he said softly. It was my faith. That evening, he invited the neighbors inside. They sat together as he told them of the psalm, of the stranger who brought the ancient fragment, of how blessing grows when shared. These words, he said, are not charms. They are truths written by those who learned that faith is strongest when fear surrounds it. One of the neighbors, a woman whose shop had burned, asked quietly, Do you think if I place such a psalm on my door, my home will be blessed again? Elior smiled gently. It is not the parchment that blesses. It is the heart that listens to its message. Place it not only on your door, but upon your life. That night, as the city slowly healed from the fire, many homes glowed with the new light of psalms written by trembling hands. A quiet unity spread through the quarter, like invisible threads of protection weaving from door to door. And when Elior finally lay down to rest, he whispered, The light does not protect because it shines. It protects because it reminds us that we are never in the dark. The words echoed softly, as if the house itself had repeated them. Weeks passed, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. The fire became a story told at markets and gatherings, a reminder of how fragile everything was, and how faith could steady trembling hands. Elior's home remained a place of calm. Yet, as all who walk the path of faith must discover, peace often invites its own kind of trial. It began subtly. A delay in shipments, a customer who failed to pay, a harsh word from a competitor who envied Elior's newfound reputation. At first, Elior brushed it aside, but soon he noticed that his business began to falter. The shop that once buzzed with customers now stood still for hours. He sat by his door, staring at the psalm above. Have I lost the blessing? He whispered. Or have I simply forgotten how to see it? That night, as he lay awake, he heard again his father's voice in memory. Blessing is not measured by what fills your hands, my son, but by what fills your heart when your hands are empty. He rose before dawn and walked through the silent streets to the synagogue. The door creaked softly as he entered. Inside, the candles flickered low, and the only sound was the faint rustle of parchment as the wind brushed against the scrolls. Elior knelt and prayed, not for wealth, not for success, but for understanding. Master of the universe, he murmured, if blessing has left me, teach me why. If it has not, open my eyes to see it again. For a long while, there was no answer, only silence. But as he sat there, the silence began to feel different, not empty, but alive. He realized that even without words, the quiet carried presence. It was not that heaven had turned away. It was that heaven was listening. He returned home and opened his shop as usual. That day not a single customer came, but instead of despairing, he lit a small lamp, placed it by the door, and began to read aloud from the psalm. He read slowly, savoring each line. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. His voice trembled, but did not stop. Each word became a thread, weaving his heart back to the source. As dusk approached, he heard soft footsteps outside. A widow from the next street entered, holding a basket of worn clothes. "Elior," she said shyly, "I heard your shop was quiet. Would you mend this for me? My husband used to do it, but since he's gone—" Elior smiled gently. "Leave it here. I'll see to it tonight." When she left, he looked again at the psalm above his door. The silence no longer felt like loss. It felt like space. Space for kindness to grow. That night, he repaired the garments carefully, humming the psalm as he worked. When he returned them the next morning, the widow's gratitude shone brighter than coins. And so, the blessing returned. Not as noise or fortune, but as peace that breathed through simple acts. Elior understood then that silence too is a form of prayer, and faith does not vanish when it is unspoken, it deepens. Later that evening, he stood by his doorway once more. "So this is the test," he whispered. "Not to hear the psalm, but to live it when all other sounds are gone." The wind stirred the parchments gently, and though they made no sound, Elior felt them speak. When the heart listens in silence, heaven answers in peace. Months passed, and the seasons turned. Spring touched Jerusalem with soft winds and scattered blossoms, and life once again flowed through the narrow streets. Elior's shop recovered, not through sudden fortune, but through quiet trust. He had learned to live not by counting blessings, but by becoming one. Yet there was still one mystery that lingered within him. The stranger who had come at midnight with the ancient parchment. Who was he? Why had he chosen Elior's door? One afternoon, as Elior closed his shop, he heard the voice of a child calling his name. It was the same boy who, months before, had come begging with herbs for his sick mother. Now taller, healthier, his eyes shone with energy. "Master Elior," he said, "my mother and I wish to thank you again. Her health has returned, and I am working now at the olive press." Elior smiled. "I am happy for you, my boy. You have grown strong." The child hesitated. "There is something else. A traveler came to the press last week. He spoke of a man in Jerusalem whose door shines at night because heaven watches over it. He asked where you lived." Elior's heart quickened. "This traveler, what did he look like?" "Old," the boy said. "With silver in his beard, his eyes were bright. He carried no staff this time, only a small scroll." Elior felt a strange mix of awe and longing. "Did he leave a message?" The boy nodded and handed him a small folded note. It was written in the same steady hand Elior remembered from that night. The message read, "The doorkeeper does not guard the house. He guards the passage between fear and faith. When your door opened to the hungry and your heart opened to heaven, the psalm became light. Keep it so." There was no signature, only a small mark drawn at the bottom, resembling two open gates. That evening, Elior stood again by his door, reading the psalm aloud as twilight deepened. He felt each word resonate, not only through the air, but within his chest. He remembered the moments of doubt, the fire, the silence, the acts of giving, and realized that the stranger's lesson had never truly been about protection. It had been about transformation. A knock interrupted his thoughts. When he opened the door, he found one of his neighbors, a proud man who had once mocked him for placing old words on his door. His face was weary now, his clothes dusty. "Elior," he said, "my son has fallen ill. The physicians can do little. Would you pray the psalm with me?" Elior invited him in, and together they stood beneath the parchment. The neighbor's voice trembled as he read, "He shall call upon me, and I will answer him." Elior continued softly, "I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him." When they finished, the man's eyes were wet. "Thank you," he whispered. "I never believed these words could touch a man's heart the way they just touched mine." Elior placed a hand on his shoulder. "They do not need belief to begin working. They only need a door to enter through." The man left quietly, and Elior watched him go, his heart heavy with compassion. Then he turned once more to the parchment and whispered, So this is what it means to be a doorkeeper, not of a house, but of faith. That night, a light glow seemed to pulse softly from the psalms, illuminating the threshold. The wind carried no sound, but Elior could almost hear the words written long ago. Place this psalm upon your door, and blessing will find its way home. And he realized the sages were never promising magic. They were teaching responsibility, to keep a door that welcomes light. One morning, as the sun poured through the narrow windows of Elior's home, the sound of hooves echoed along the stone street. A courier rode through the quarter, stopping at each corner to deliver messages sealed with wax. Elior thought little of it until the young messenger stopped at his door. "Elior ben Yitzhak?" the boy asked, holding out a scroll. "Yes," Elior answered, puzzled. "Who sends this?" The boy shrugged. "It bears the seal of the sages of Tiberias." He bowed quickly and rode away. Elior turned the scroll in his hands. The seal indeed bore the emblem of the ancient council, 3 olive branches intertwined around a star. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax. Inside, the parchment carried a message written in elegant, flowing Hebrew. "To Elior, son of Yitzhak, keeper of the psalm and servant of kindness, word of your door has reached even our hills. They say that your home has become a sanctuary for the weary, and that your heart has become a lamp for others. We write not to honor you, but to remind you of the teaching that was once whispered by our fathers. He who guards a door of faith must never close it, not even when the world grows dark. Know this, there are many who will seek blessings by placing holy words upon their thresholds, but few who understand that the greater act is to live those words with every breath. If your house shines, it is because your deeds illuminate the parchment, not the other way around." The letter was signed simply, "The Council of the Sages, Tiberias." Elior read the words again and again, feeling the weight of them settle in his heart. He looked toward his door, toward the psalms that had become his silent teachers, and whispered, "How far these words have traveled, from parchment to heart, from door to door." That evening, as the lamps were lit, Elior gathered the children of the street. They sat cross-legged near his doorway as he told them the story of the psalm, how it came to him, how it had saved his home, and how true blessing begins not in the heavens, but in the choices of ordinary people. A small girl raised her hand. "Master Elior," she asked, "if I write a psalm on my door, will angels come to protect me?" Elior smiled gently. "They already do," he said. "Every act of kindness you show becomes an angel. Every time you help another, you invite one to dwell beside you. The psalm is not a call to the sky, it is a reminder of what you already are capable of." The children listened wide-eyed as the light from the oil lamps danced on the walls. To them, Elior's door seemed to glow with something beyond light. A warmth, a presence that made them feel safe. When the children left, Elior sat alone and opened the letter once more. His eyes rested on the final line, barely visible at the bottom of the parchment. When the door of one heart opens, heaven writes another line of blessing upon the world. He thought of all the doors he had passed by in his life, some closed, some open, some forgotten. And he wondered how many blessings waited, unseen, behind them. As he drifted to sleep that night, the wind moved softly through the street, whispering between homes. It carried no words, but its rhythm felt like prayer. Elior smiled in his dreams, hearing the echo of the sages, wisdom. A psalm on the door invites angels. But a generous heart keeps them there. The years moved quietly, like soft wind through olive trees. The once restless merchant of the market had become a figure of calm reverence in Jerusalem's quarter. People spoke his name not for his trade, but for the peace that lingered wherever he walked. The door of Elior's home had become a place of silent pilgrimage. Neighbors, travelers, even scholars would come to stand before it, to read the psalm, to feel the strange calm that flowed from its words. One evening, a group of young students came from the yeshiva beyond the city wall. They knocked gently, and when Elior opened, they bowed slightly. Their leader, a thin boy with bright eyes, said, "Master Elior, we've heard that your door shines at night. We wish to understand why." Elior chuckled softly. "It is not the door that shines, my young friends. It is the hearts that look upon it with faith." "But the neighbors say they've seen light," the boy insisted. "Ah," said Elior. "Then perhaps heaven has chosen to reflect their own longing for light through these old stones." He invited them in. The students sat in a circle on the floor, while Elior poured tea and began to tell them his story. From the empty doorframe to the stranger at midnight, from the psalm that trembled in his hands to the day the fire turned away. His voice carried the cadence of time, each word slow, deliberate, glowing with truth. When he finished, silence filled the room. Finally, one of the boys asked, "Rabbi, if the blessing is not in the parchment, then why do we still place psalms and mezuzot on our doors?" Elior smiled. "Because, my child, we are forgetful beings. We need reminders. Just as one places a lamp by the road to remember the way home, the holy words remind us who we are. They do not bring blessing, they awaken it." He rose and touched the parchment above the door. "This," he said, "is only paper and ink. But when a heart touches it with intention, it becomes a mirror between the world and heaven. The psalm does not protect by magic, it protects by memory. It teaches us, every time we pass beneath it, that holiness begins where kindness is practiced." The students bowed their heads. One whispered, "Then your door is not a door at all, it's a prayer." Elior smiled. "Perhaps every door is a prayer, if we open it that way." The students left quietly, their faces lit by the amber glow of the street lamps. Elior watched them disappear into the winding alleys and felt a deep peace settle within him. He turned to his door once more, running his fingers over the faded letters. Though years had passed, they still gleamed faintly, alive with unseen warmth. That night, as he prepared for rest, Elior dreamed a dream unlike any other. In it, the entire street was lined with doors like his, each glowing softly, each bearing psalms written by loving hands. From above, the city looked like a constellation of lights, each one a home, each home a blessing. He awoke before dawn, the dream vivid in his heart. Opening the door, he saw the horizon blush with the first light of day. He whispered softly, "May every door that opens this morning become a gate of mercy." As the sun rose, its rays struck the parchment, and for a moment the doorway indeed glowed, a gentle, living light that touched the threshold, then faded into warmth. Elior stood there for a long time. Knowing what he had witnessed was not a miracle, but a reflection, the echo of countless unseen prayers carried through the generations. He whispered one final truth to the morning breeze. A door of faith never truly belongs to one man. It belongs to all who pass through it, who— And in that whisper, the psalm seemed to breathe once more, its words no longer bound by parchment, but alive within every heart it had touched. Years turned into decades, and the marketplace changed hands many times. Children who had once played outside Elior's home grew into merchants, scholars, and parents. Yet one thing remained the same: the door. The two parchments, though yellowed by time, still hung there, fragile yet unbroken. Pilgrims would still come, whispering verses, pressing their fingers gently to the frame, feeling that same quiet warmth. Elior had grown old. His beard, once dark and full, was now white as snow. His steps were slow, his eyes soft and bright like a fading candle. But his heart had only deepened, widened, softened. Each morning, he greeted the psalm as one greets an old friend. Each night, before closing his eyes, he would say, "You and I have kept this door together." One evening, as the sun sank behind the golden walls of the city, Elior sat by the door and felt an unfamiliar stillness. It was not sorrow, nor fear, just a deep, full peace. The world outside continued its rhythm, but inside his home, time seemed to pause. He gazed at the parchment and whispered, "When I am gone, may these words continue to speak." Moments later, there was a gentle knock. A young woman entered, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She introduced herself as the granddaughter of the boy who had once come barefoot to Elior's door. "My grandfather told me," she said, "that you once fed him when no one else would. Before he died, he asked me to bring you this." She unfolded the bundle. Inside was a new parchment, blank, the edges trimmed neatly. "He said you would know what to do with it." Elior smiled. "Yes," he whispered. "I do." He placed the new parchment on the table, beside a quill and a bottle of ink. Slowly, carefully, he began to write once more. The letters flowed from his hand like a prayer remembered by the soul itself. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. He finished, then lifted his eyes toward the old parchments above the door. "You have guarded me all my days," he said softly. "Now guard those who come after." He placed the new parchment between the two older ones, forming a bridge of ink and faith across generations. The air in the room shimmered with warmth. For a moment, the flickering lamp steadied, casting a single beam of light upon the doorway. Elior closed his eyes and felt as if the light itself had entered his chest. When neighbors came the next morning, they found the old man seated peacefully by his door, his face serene, a faint smile on his lips. The psalm above the door glowed faintly in the dawn. It was said that for 3 days afterward, a soft fragrance, like myrrh and cedar, lingered around his home. Years later, when people spoke of Elior, they no longer called him the merchant. They called him the doorkeeper of blessings. His house became a place of teaching. Those who entered would say they felt lighter, as if their burdens had been gently lifted at the threshold. The psalm remained there, untouched, until even the stones forgot the name of the street, but not the story. And so the sage's saying proved true. Place this psalm on your door, and you will attract infinite blessings. But the wise understood that the psalm did not create the blessings, it revealed them. For every act of kindness, every open door, every word spoken in faith becomes a psalm written, not on parchment, but upon the soul. Elior 8's story reminds us of this truth. Blessing is not something we chase, it is something we welcome, by the way we open our hearts to others. If this message has touched you, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your thoughts. Tell me, what kind of door do you want your life to be?